Our next module will cover the topic of finance. Now, the word finance can either be used as a noun or a verb. Finance as a noun is the branch of economics that deals with managing money. So you can get a degree in finance. Finance as a noun also can refer to as the assets in the form of money. So for instance, I could ask you, how are your finances? And that's another way of asking you, how is your money doing? Finance can also be used as a verb. In that case, that means either you're going to supply money or credit, or you're going to obtain money or credit. So as an example, you might have financed a car purchase. So in that example, you are the one obtaining the money to get a car. The company who gave you the loan for the car financed your loan. So in that case, we're using the same word, but from their point of view, they gave you the money. So finance could either be used to supply money to somebody or to obtain money from somebody. Now in this first section, we are just going to look at percents. So we're going to convert between fractions, decimals, and percents, and we're going to solve some problems involving percents and percent changes. So first, let's talk about doing conversions. Now fractions, decimals, and percents are all different ways of talking about the same concept. So we could even maybe organize them in a chart over here. So you can have a fraction, you could have a decimal, or you could have a percent. And we can go flexibly back and forth between any one of these three representations. Let me give you maybe a familiar example of a number that could be represented in any one of these three formats. So a fraction, how about 1/2? This fraction as a decimal would be 0.5 or 5/10. As a percent, this would be 50%. So the same concept can be expressed in three different representations. Let's talk about how to change from a decimal to a percent. So to change a number from a decimal to a percent, you're going to multiply by 100. And then you're going to add the percent sign. So in this first example, if I were to take this decimal 0.3 and I were to multiply by 100, we would get 30, and then I'm going to add the percent sign. In this next example, for 1.2, if I were to multiply that by 100, I would get 120, and then I would add the percent sign. For this last decimal, if I were to multiply this by 100, I would get 5.2814, and then I would add the percent sign. Okay, so the way kind of I remember how to convert between a decimal to percent is you might notice that the decimal is always going to move 2 to the right. That's effectively what's going to happen when we multiply by 100. So in this case, this decimal moved 2 to the right, and I had to put that filler 0 in there. This decimal moved 2 to the right. This decimal moved 2 to the right. I like to maybe use the acronym to remind me of how to move the decimal. The acronym I use is Dr. Pepper. So in the word Dr. Pepper, how do we get from the D to the P? We have to move 2 to the right. Now what if you want to go the reverse way, if you want to go from a percent to a decimal? Well, you could divide by 100. Okay, and then you're going to remove the percent sign. Dividing by 100 is equivalent to moving the decimal 2 to the left. So in this word Dr. Pepper, how do I get from the P to the D? I would go 2 to the left. So to change from a percent to a decimal, we move the decimal point 2 to the left. So on these examples, if I would move this decimal point 2 to the left, I would get 0.624. In this example, the decimal point is right here, so if I move that decimal point 2 to the left, I would get 1.22. And then on this last example, this involves a fraction. So you can approach this one of two ways. Either we could take the fraction and divide it by 100. So maybe I'll do that off to the side over here. So I would have the fraction divided by 100. So then remember then what we would do is we would change the division to multiplication, and then this number would get flipped to its reciprocal. So I would end up with this. All right, and then multiplying these fractions, you would get 1 over 500, which this converted to a decimal then, because ultimately I want to convert this percent to its decimal form. So this fraction is a decimal. If in a calculator I do 1 divided by 500, we get 0.002. This is one way to do this problem. The other way is I could convert this fraction to its decimal form, but still inside this percent notation. So 1/5 as a decimal would be 0.2. And at that point in time, I'm still in its percent form. Now I would convert this to its decimal form by moving the decimal 2 to the left. So this would then be 0.002. If I move this decimal point 2 over, I'm going to need to put in a filler 0. So either method works. All right, the last conversions we're going to do is change from a fraction to a percent. Now there's a couple different approaches you could take on these. Sometimes the easiest approach is maybe we'll convert the fraction to a decimal and then convert the decimal to a percent. Because for that conversion, it's just a matter of moving the decimal point over. So this fraction, 11 over 20, if I were to convert that to a decimal, so you would do 11 divided by 20. So this fraction as a decimal equivalent would be 0.55. Then to convert from the decimal to the percent, you're going to move the decimal point right 2 spots. So then this would be then equivalent to 55%. And maybe seeing that repeated again. This fraction, 13 divided by 16, would give us the decimal equivalent of 0.8125. Moving the decimal point right 2 spots to convert it to its percent form, we would get 81.25%. Now this is just one technique from converting from fraction to a percent, as you could do from fraction to decimal and then from decimal to percent. But on this last one, it's not going to convert to a decimal very nicely. So if you were to do 7/9 divided by your calculator, you're going to get a decimal that goes on forever. So one way that we can do this conversion, but make sure that we don't round at all, is you can set up what's called a proportion. So 7/9 is equivalent to some number out of 100. This number is what I'm looking for the percent. Percent means per 100. So then I would think, okay, for this fraction, then what would it be in terms of the quantity out of 100? So this is called a proportion. It says two fractions equal one another. In a proportion, the cross products are equal, meaning if I multiply this times this, it's got to be equivalent to what that times that is. So setting that up as an equation, I would have then 9 times x is equal to 7 times 100. Or 9x is equal to 700. Solving this for x by dividing both sides by 9, we would get x is equal to 700 over 9. And then converting this fraction, because it's improper, we'll write it in its mixed form. This fraction in its mixed form, 9 goes into 700 77 times, with 7 left over. So this fraction then would be as a mixed form 77 and 7/9, and then we'll add the percent sign, because this will end up being the numerator out of 100, so this would be then my percent. This would be the number out of 100 that is representative of this fraction 7/9. Now if on the problem or in the directions you're told to round the percent maybe to the nearest percent or to the nearest tenth of a percent, you could convert this fraction to its decimal equivalent, and then from the decimal you could convert to a percent and round it. This technique allows me to make sure that my percent remains accurate, so there's no rounding at this point in time.